Today's video is about looking backwards at some of the things that to me now are real markers of femininity that I had even before I knew I needed to transition. You know, things trip memories, and this letter, of which I've written the script on the back of, was one of them. This letter came to me when I was living in Quito, or rather came to my parents' house. It is from the LGBT network, talking about the Long Island gay and lesbian youth. And that's all well and good, except that it is addressed to Miss Kit Robinson. What's interesting is that this came in June of 2015, and now we are in 2020 and past June, and for 5 years I've held on to this request for cash. I transitioned just over a year ago. I went on hormones just over a year and a half ago. So what happened in the intervening 5 years? Lots. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to talk about today is sort of looking backwards. What were the things that, had I been in a different place in a different time, might have, not any one of them, but cumulatively been some indicator of who I was inside. There are the early ones that we all remember that are pretty common. I had dress shoes. They were men's dress shoes, but to me, they had heels, and I had a pair of shoes with heels, and I couldn't ask for anything more than a pair of shoes with heels. There's the fact that I wanted to be mom when we played house. Actually, I would play house anytime you wanted, so long as I could be the mother. There's a story from my childhood where I wanted a Barbie for Christmas. I wanted a Barbie more than anything else for Christmas. And my parents, being the kind folk that they are, and my mother being the feminist and therefore not thinking that boys couldn't play with dolls, made me a whole clan, a family, if you will, of dolls, and with changeable clothes and luggage, and it just was an incredible thing for them to do. And I recognize that now, and I saw them under the Christmas tree the last time I was there at Christmas, and it just brought warmth to my heart, and sadness that I didn't accept them at the time for what they were, the marvelous gift. But I rejected them at the time, because what I wanted was Barbie, and it wasn't Barbie. It's interesting how the dolls thing plays out, because I don't think that dolls are inherently a female toy. I think that the girls around me were playing with dolls. I identified with the girls, and I wanted what they had. And in this case, that would have been Barbie. Now, I still have 2 dolls, both of which were given to me by my grandmother. One is a rag doll of the original sort, wonderful. The other is a plastic doll where the limbs move, and she was happy to let me have both of them, and so that was wonderful. Then there are the subtler, if you will, indications that have come along the journey. I can remember in elementary school, I don't know, 3rd, 4th grade sort of time frame, when we all wrote to the president, at that point Jimmy Carter, on Save the Whales. That was what we were all doing. We were all signing letters to Save the Whales, and we each got a letter back from Jimmy Carter. Mine was addressed to Miss Kit Robinson. I can remember that my teacher was just mortified for me that my letter would have been addressed in the feminine, and here I was obviously a boy, and yet I loved that letter. I thought of that letter in wonderful ways, and so there it was. Little indication that, in fact, I identified with the feminine and not the masculine. Much, much more recent. I was coming out of church one Sunday, one of the parishioners wished me Happy Mother's Day. And I said, Anne, why? And Anne said, because you do the work of a mother. And I treasured that in my heart so much. And you have to understand, it was a rural congregation. Transgenderism probably would not have been accepted in that location. But to this 80-year-old farmer's wife, I did the work of a mother. Right around that time, there were a whole bunch of little things that happened. There's this festival called Day to Be Gay. I was a pastor of a church, and we decided to have a church booth at Day to Be Gay, and I and my family then manned the booth. And while we were there, they had a tug of war. Old-fashioned tug of war, you know, two sides, each pulling against the other. Flag has to go across the line. But what I remember about it so much was that the announcer said, all the femmes over here and all the butches over there. And I failed to participate because I wanted to go to the femme side but was unwilling to accept that at that point. Sometime shortly after that, I went to a concert as part of the True Colors tour, and I remember that concert incredibly well. And I also remember that it was one of the first times I felt like I was in a space where who I was okay. At that point, I didn't even identify as transsexual or transgender. I just knew there was something about that space. That brought me in contact with a band called The Clicks. And again, looking backwards, I think to myself, why did I identify so strongly with, why did I appreciate the music of The Clicks so much? And what I know is that it's because they were telling my story in different ways. That brought me to Tegan and Sarah and to other bands that then have transgender members singing, playing, being part of the band in very normal ways. That said, why didn't this, which is now obvious, happen in years gone by? I mean, I grew up in a household that spent lots of time in the gay and lesbian community in and around it. My church growing up had a large gay and lesbian contingent. I remember being at their houses. I remember, you know, the kids who had two dads. What I also know is that the examples we had of the transsexual community at that stage were things like, well, when I would have been older, were things like Tootsie, which that was really more drag queen stuff, and I'm not a drag queen. Or Mrs. Doubtfire, which obviously had the underlying tone of this is a man pretending to be a woman so that he can do the things he wants to do to be a mother. So most of the examples I would have had then had some sort of negative spin in terms of the cultural side of it. More recently, though, what happened to shift that narrative is very interesting. I saw the movie Normal, about a guy in Iowa who transitioned to be the woman that she always was. And then there was the television show Transparent. It has its flaws, don't get me wrong. Transparent is not a perfect 100%, but it did show me that there were people who, even later in life, and she would have been much older than I when transitioning, could decide that they needed to transition. So for those examples, I'm incredibly thankful because they are what made it possible when I was at Johnny and Chris's house. And Chris said, "Do you hear how you refer to yourself?" And I referred to myself in the feminine. So, context. We were talking about family time, and we were talking about my 3 daughters, and we were talking about my wife. So there's the 4 of them, and there's me. And when I referred to the 5 of us, I referred to the 5 of us all as female. It's a household of women, myself being one of them. Now understand that there had been references earlier to myself being a woman, but nobody had picked up on it, or we had joked about it. So for instance, there was sort of this running joke with my kids and my wife that I was simply a lesbian trapped in a man's body, and you know, thankfully I found a wife and kids and I could accept that. And that's all great and wonderful, but when I was at Chris and Johnny's house. Chris turned around to me and said, "Do you hear how you refer to yourself?" And I think that for me was the turning point. In spite of all this other stuff that happened, that was the turning point that got me to say, maybe. Now, that was right around the time of Chris Jenner. That was right around the time of Transparent. That was right around the time I would have seen Normal as a movie. It was also a summer when I was doing a lot of spiritual psychological work with myself. And so, that then led to a discernment process. The discernment process then led to me actually transitioning to be the woman you see in front of you. The woman now known as the Pink Pastor. Interestingly, the Pink Pastor started when I was a male, and has just sort of been this carrying thing. Not really wearing much pink today, except for maybe the mask that is over my wrist, waiting to be donned should another person actually come close. So, just wanted to sit down while it was all fresh in my mind and record it and think about it and let you all have it. As I noted in the first video, this channel is both about me exploring my faith journey and looking at the stories of my life as they happen, and obviously being trans, coming to the place where I decided to transition is one of the great stories of my life. So here's a piece of that story. There will be more along the way. I hope this finds you well, and in the words of Mr. Rogers, there are multiple ways to do things: kind, and kind. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't say, if you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you like the content, please subscribe. There will be more as time goes on. Thank you.